In this video, let's talk about geometry mode. If I click this button, it will bring up my tools window. I'm going to create buttons first. Capture, drag and drop, boom. So if I go to this Geo versus Map tab, it has all the tools for geometry mode. And if you compare them to the ones in the bottom tools, this button is exactly same as this one. And that button does exactly the same thing as this button. But this button has more options. If I right click on it, I have a lot more options to it. I'll get back to this later. Now let's go to the geometry mode. Let's say I am in the geometry mode and say I'm moving things around. For some reason, I don't like the changes that I'm making. I just want to ignore everything here. In that case, click this delete all button. It will delete out everything. And you can click this to restart. Here we have align buttons, average size buttons, average gap buttons. These two, for example, this one is exactly same as this one. And that one does exactly same thing as this one does. And also average gap button, horizontal. This one is exactly same as that one. This one does exactly same thing does as this one. We haven't talked about these two buttons. Let me demonstrate. So let's say if I want to align them, select all the buttons like this, align like that. I don't like the gaps. I can average out the gaps. You will notice the first one and the last one will not change. So if you have uneven gaps like this, select all the buttons. If you click this button, you will maintain the first one and the last one, and then you will compute the average gap between the buttons, and then you will apply them. Now, let's say I have different scale like that. And if I want to average out the scale, I can click this to set uniform width of the button. I can click this button to apply uniform height to the button. Now, let's talk about mirror buttons. Let's say I have all the buttons laid out for left hand, and imagine I have to do the same thing to the other side of the hand. To me, that's a nightmare. So I'm going to go to the geometry mode. I'm going to make this layout a little bit wider. I'm going to select all the buttons here, move it to the right hand side, like so, and then select this mirror button. Notice I am going to replace LF string to RT. It's because I have named all those controls with different position string. So I click this button, voila, I'm done, almost. Going back to the map layout. Now I can either move this post button to over there or go to Command tab. I'm going to check this option to keep the assigned object names because I don't want to change the membership. And I'm going to drag and drop this button to over here. Then I'll change the orientation of the slider. If I want to change the colors, I can pick a color here and drag and drop. And I can do the same thing to these buttons and so on. Now, let's talk about grouping. Let's say I have all the buttons for fingers right here. And let's say the buttons are too crowded. If I want to spread out all these buttons, I can either move each button like this, or I can go to the geometry mode. I'm going to move it back to where it was. I'm going to select all the buttons like this. I'm going to group it, center the pivot point, and scale. Now, I don't want to uniformly scale, so I'm just going to select the buttons like that. I'm going to set the scale to 15 maybe, or even smaller, like that. And I can always adjust the midground lines like this. I can just select the components and then rescale them, make it a little bit thinner like that. Going back to the map layout, I get to change like this. But let's say you don't like the orientation of the layout. Right now, these finger layout is this camera view, meaning I am looking at the hand in this angle. But what if you want the controls to be more like this, so that fingers are pointing towards upward and palm pointing to the downward? In other words, you basically want to flip this over. Before I go to the geometry mode, I have an option here. Right click on it, and I can say convert parent buttons to the background and then flip vertically. Click that, boom, it's already done. All I need to do, going back to the map layout, I'm done now. And also you can try out different options here, such as rotating clockwise 90 degree. I can do that. It's already done. Going back to the map layout, I can do this. Or I can try rotate 180. Boom, it's already done. Going back to the map layout, it's done. So you can use any of these options to flip the layout or rotate the layout. Now let's talk about midground. Midground lines are basically buttons, but they do not have any functions. They're just there to represent lines. So it helps readability. For example, let me go back to the geometry mode. If I select all these buttons, click on this button here, it will create bounding curve around the selected buttons. I'm gonna adjust the size And if I click on this button, it will create midground boxes along the selected straight curve. Click on it. Going back to the map layout. Now, this line is representing these 4 buttons are belonging to one finger. Going back to geometry mode, we have talked about making straight line like this. Click this button to create lines. If you don't like the thickness of this, I can undo this. I can change the thickness here and then redo it. I get much thicker lines.